Hello, DawgNation. Happy Tuesday to you. What day is this? Tuesday? Happy Tuesday to you. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Fun to be doing the show after a big-time commitment. Georgia got one of those yesterday from linebacker C.J. Allen. We will talk about that on the program today and kind of get into what's next for Georgia at that position and in general. Obviously, I think one of the most interesting positions for Georgia in the class of 2023 is that linebacker spot because of the history of success that UGA has had when it comes to linebackers, the value, the importance of that position on some of Georgia's best defenses under Kirby Smart. More on that coming up in a moment, but also because of, the biggest cliche in the world when it comes to recruiting is, spots are tight. Well, it seems like when it comes to linebacker, spots are pretty tight in terms of the big names that we have talked about a little bit that you see being chatted about on the internet. Georgia obviously doesn't have room for all of those. So how do those dominoes start to fall here after the addition of Allen into the class yesterday? We'll talk about that. I'm going to also talk about, to me, a very simple statement about the UGA defense. I believe this upcoming season on the field, getting away from recruiting eventually in the program today, I believe there is one thing for this defense that probably matters more than anything for the upcoming season. For all the talk that's out there about who Georgia needs to replace, and that is not inconsequential conversations, obviously, but for all the talk of that, to me, it kind of comes down to one thing for the Georgia defense here this year. I'll tell you on the show today about what that one thing is and why maybe really nothing else matters as much as that. There's also some very interesting recruiting news not involving UGA today, both in terms of an SEC team that lost out on a battle that I think most people probably expected it to lose, but also maybe a little bit of a surprising destination for one 5-star prospect. So we'll deal with all of that on the program today before we're all said and done. Connor Riley also stops by to see us today, and that's always a nice thing to have Connor on the program, so we'll do that with him coming up in just a minute there as well. Before that, though, it's your time to talk here on the 1st and 15. Those of you checking in, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, we're glad to have you with us as we do. So let's dive in here and get some comments. Bill Russell checks in to say if you need material for the chortle, he says just check out those recruiting rankings 40 through 49. Yeah, you see some SEC rivals down there near that area, including the Florida Gators themselves. Now, admittedly, Florida did get a decent recruit over the weekend. Imagine how bad the recruiting class would be had they not gotten, pretty good defensive lineman came in, top 150 type player over the weekend they were able to get. So even with that, the Florida recruiting class still not looking great. So, Bill, you're right. That is, if you're looking for chortle-inspiring fodder, that is certainly some of that there, and you're absolutely right about that. Thomas T-Bone 86 says, happy first day of summer. Is it officially the first day of summer today? That's always cool. And happy National Peach and Cream Day. I don't know that I've ever actually had peaches and cream. I hear people talking about it all the time. Now, I've had a peach ice cream sandwich at the Masters, and let me tell you right now, that is very good. But I don't know that I've ever actually had the official what peaches and cream. I hear people talk about it all the time. I don't think I'm fancy enough for stuff like that. That seems like something that people that are fancier than me would probably have. Big Daddy checking in from Central Florida. Love Central Florida. Hoping to maybe check out a little Central Florida area before the summer's done again, and glad to have Big Daddy there. I am sure it's hotter than the surface of the sun, but I'm also sure Big Daddy's probably pretty close to a swimming pool or something like that. So he is no doubt enjoying himself. Hemingway says the recruiting process is cool, but I'm ready to see and hear about the summer-fall camp, LOL. And I do get Hemingway on that. And I think that, amongst like the category of like big-time, very plugged-in Georgia fans, which obviously you're participating in this comment section right now, you are. I do think there are a couple of distinct camps on that. I think there are some people who are genuinely into the whole recruiting storyline soap opera. I think there are some people who just really like that. I probably am like that a little bit. I'm a little kind of a hype guy by nature. I kind of like, some of y'all know I like pro wrestling, things like that. There is definitely a pro wrestling aspect to recruiting that I'm really attracted to. And so I'm into the whole like process of who's visiting where and how they're announcing their stuff. And it's not to say that I like everything that goes on with the recruiting these days and age. There are some of these recruiting photos that have come out lately that I'm a little turned off by. But I still, generally speaking, I have a pretty high tolerance for recruiting drama. So I kind of enjoy that. There are other people, though, who sort of follow recruiting because it's sort of the necessary thing you have to do to have the roster you want to have to go out and compete. And there are some fans who are just more interested in the product on the field. You know, practices, getting ready for games to be played right now. There are a lot of people who kind of live in sort of that present tense mindset when it comes to Georgia football. They're not worried about what the 2024 team is going to look like. They're not worried about what the current recruiting class looks like. They sort of are interested in the 85 players who are currently on scholarship right now. And I don't really know that any mindset, any idea is more right than the other. As I said, I'm probably a little more in the camp of I just like following recruiting. I think it's kind of fascinating. But that is not everybody's cup of tea. I will certainly acknowledge that. DT checking in to give you an HBTFD, and you always love to see that. Tiffany R checks in to say June is a great month to be a dog with these commits, less than 70 days till kickoff. Yeah, I'd say that thus far, June is working out to be not, what's the word, what I'm trying to say, is that sometimes, you know, as I mentioned, there's a pretty strong connection between hype and recruiting. And the problem with hype is it sort of leaves you wanting more sometimes. You are told, oh, so-and-so, it's going to be, what is it people say now? It's going to be tapped and turned or on and popping or whatever the phrase of the moment is. And when the actual moment gets to you, now you're sort of told, well, no, it's next month. You know, hey, June's going to be huge. And well, actually, no, July is going to be huge. You sort of, sometimes there's always kind of a little bit of a moving goalpost for when the action's really going to get here when it comes to recruiting. I'd say, though, that June is working out to not really be that. You know, when Connor was here last Tuesday, Connor Riley, our colleague who will be with us later on today, when he was here last Tuesday, I told him, I said, you know, I think it's easier for the media to appreciate the buzz sometimes because maybe they have just better avenues for measuring it. Whereas for like the average fan, you see a lot of visits taking place. You see a little bit of online chatter as it relates to UGA, and you're kind of left to wonder, okay, well, what is the tangible benefit of all of this? When are the commits going to come? Well, I think that now, after what happened with A.J. Harris last week, what happened with C.J. Allen yesterday, Georgia gets a big kicker commit, which I don't think you should, necessarily snuff off too quickly. The point here is that all of a sudden Georgia really is starting to add some big names. They are climbing the ladder when it comes to recruiting rankings. What is it, Georgia third in the composite right now? So, for all the hype that existed about what June was going to be, the visits were clearly there. We knew that was going to be the case. But the tangible benefit of some of those visits, we're also starting to see some of that too. And I don't think you should ignore that necessarily. So good comment, Tiffany. What else is going on? Georgianne Olive, always great to see her. Big Dog Brock checking in to say, good morning, BA and DawgNation. How about them hairy dogs and all those top commits? Yeah, listen, it's fun to see. I love to see the way in which Georgia's adding those big names into that class right now. That is a great thing to be able to see. By the way, he got that comment in early, 9:36, well before the show began. He was already getting that comment in. You love to be able to see that. Let me see if I can refresh here. I may have a little bit of a issue going on. Yeah, so comments rolling in fast and furious, and we'll get all of this for you. We'll also have a fun golden shoe before the show is done here today. And as I said before, for some of you who do kind of want to keep hearing about some of that on-field stuff, we're going to do a little bit of that on the program today because I was thinking about the Georgia defense a little bit, and I was thinking about some of those lingering questions that I still have about the Georgia defense. And you'll hear me say this in a moment. I think one of the things that you just sort of have to acknowledge is that Georgia really does have a lot of big holes to fill. Now, I'm the kind of person that's kind of contrarian by nature. When everybody sort of thinks one thing, I have a tendency to sort of think something different. I'm a little bit of a contrarian by nature. I get sort of tired of everybody kind of saying the same thing all the time. So there's a part of me that when I hear everybody saying, Georgia's got so much to replace, and Georgia's going to be so much worse off because of everything it has to replace, and on and on and on you go about some of that kind of stuff, I have a tendency to think, well, maybe the masses are actually wrong about this. Maybe what Georgia's going to do defensively is actually a little, set up for more success than maybe the average person kind of considers. However, even for someone like me who's sort of a contrarian by nature, there is just an acknowledgement you have to have of when you lose like 3 first-round defensive linemen and Lewisine and Nakobe Dean and all the big names that Georgia's lost, that clearly leaves you a lot to replace. And so how do you go about replacing it? I think for me, if you told me I could have this one thing, and we'll get more in later on to that, what that one thing is. If I could have this one thing, I think that would go a long way towards really making me feel a whole lot better about the outlook for the Georgia defense here this season. So for those of you who want something other than just recruiting on the show today, a little on-field talk, a little look ahead to the 2022 season, we'll give some of that to you here in just a few minutes. And we're going to use a contrast from last season. One game that went really well for Georgia, one game that did not go so well for Georgia, as the perfect example of kind of why that is. By the way, welcome in on all other platforms today: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. Glad to have all of you here for video today. We're going to have a really fun show coming up. Obviously, a lot of reaction to the C.J. Allen commitment from yesterday. Georgia adding another big-time linebacker, something the Dogs have gotten very good at doing here over the course of the last few years. So we will certainly have plenty to say about that. Our good friend Connor Riley stops by to see us there as well. And that's always a nice thing to be able to do, to have Connor here as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take. Looking forward to being able to do that. There's big recruiting news outside of UGA. We'll cover a lot of that for you today. And, of course, we have a fun golden shoe coming up before we're all said and done there as well. Let me also get Hemingway's comment here, and then we'll get ready to start the show after that. Hemingway checks in to say, every year, previously unheralded players have to step up if we're field a national championship contender, which is why summer and fall camp are of primary interest to me. Yeah, I totally get that. And for Georgia, this year is going to be no different there on that. And I think you're left to wonder, okay, well, who are those guys? And, yesterday we talked about wide receiver a little bit if you were part of yesterday's show. And I think we have a tendency to put, a lot of players into certain groupings and categories this time of year of, oh, well, so-and-so is your breakout star and so-and-so is your whatever. But I don't think you can lose sight of the value of players who maybe don't quite rise to the level of breakout star, or maybe don't quite rise to the level of being your all SEC, your true team leader, future first-round pick. I mean, there is something to be said for just getting a contribution. There's something to be said for being there for Georgia when it needs something. I mean, how many moments in last year's national championship season were that? Whether it be, a Dan Jackson block along the way to an interception return for a touchdown, or, how many other moments that you could mention that were not glory plays. They were not highlight reel moments necessarily. They're just stepping up and doing your job when it needs to be done. That really is the story of a championship, whether it be in college football or Major League Baseball or everything else in between. It's a series of contributions made over the course of the long haul that determine how successful you're going to be. And as Hemingway said, it's the work that's being done during this portion of the year, as far removed as the watchful eye of fans and media as you can be. This is where you as a player show how bad you want it, because the coaches aren't out there. There was a cool video that was shown the other day. An Alabama player kind of shared a POV type video of what his life is like during this time of year, and he's going from class, nutrition, whatever else. It's actually pretty interesting. I don't like Alabama, but this video is actually kind of cool. And going out there to kind of do workouts and participate in kind of some drill work, some things like that. And as they're doing all this, these Alabama players, and you presume that the Georgia situation is very similar in this, there's no coaches to be found anywhere. This is really one of those things where you have to have that fire burning in you. Intrinsic motivation, I believe smart, fancy people would say. You got to have that right now. And it's the way in which you cultivate that part of your mindset, that part of your sort of inner workings that give you a chance to be, as Hemingway mentioned, one of those guys that can contribute in a major way to a great season once the games start being played for real during the fall. And that's kind of what we're getting here this time of year. So we'll talk about that some on the program today. Connor Riley, will have him on the program there too. Kind of interesting report yesterday coming out of the New Orleans Times-Picayune. I know our buddy Michael Carvel at DawgNation wrote about this there as well, that I guess Stetson Bennett is on his way to the Manning Passing Academy that takes place at Northwestern State University here coming up soon in Louisiana. I'll ask Connor what he thinks the value of Stetson hanging around some of those other top-flight quarterbacks would be, and if there's any... I don't know if this is necessarily a thing that helps Georgia with Arch Manning necessarily, but it could help, Stetson getting a chance to rub elbows with quarterbacks who are achieving what he himself individually would certainly like to achieve for himself there too. So we'll talk about that as well before the show is done. We're going to have a good time. We love doing this show each and every day throughout the summer, getting you ready for the upcoming season. So what do you say we get it going? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I think you have to say that the month of June is working out to be pretty much what Georgia fans were told that it would be. I mean, you want to go back into like the early spring, it really sort of seemed like the month of June was kind of circled as a major epicenter for the 2023 recruiting class, not just for the Dogs, but across the rest of the country there as well. The gravitational pull of the class has just kind of moved up in the calendar year, whereas maybe years ago you were thinking about, wintertime with a February decision. And even as the early signing period began in 2018, with sort of that late fall, December time becoming a really big deal, all of a sudden it seems like more and more guys are taking advantage of these summer official visits, looking to make decisions and get the information they need about making their decision prior to the start of their senior year. July is a dead period for stuff like that. So a lot of this now happens in June. And if you follow like the social media chatter related to a lot of this kind of stuff, you saw all these elite 4- and 5-star prospects saying, I got to visit Georgia coming up June the whatever. And on you go there, and there was just all of this attention, such a big spotlight pointed on the month of June. You knew big visits were going to happen, but for a lot of fans, the question is, okay, well, what is the tangible benefit of those visits? What is the aftermath of all this buzz that seems to exist around UGA recruiting? And sometimes we're led to believe, it's going to be so easily measured. It's going to be so ever present and apparent for all of us. And sometimes it doesn't quite work out that way, but I'd say this month for Georgia is kind of working out that way, whether it be A.J. Harris last week, which we obviously had a really good time with, or C.J. Allen, the really good-looking linebacker that made his commitment announcement to Georgia yesterday. And admittedly, I think for those of us who kind of do this for a living, present Georgia content on the internet, I think and by the way, good look there at Allen on your screen if you're watching on video. Another one of these recruits that takes advantage of the all-white uniforms, including the helmet, for his recruiting photo. Got the committed background there, and he puts out the Go Dogs there on Twitter. So C.J. Allen clearly having a good time with this on social media. That's great to see from him. But the point here is, I think for those of us who do this kind of thing, present Georgia content on the internet, sometimes what counts as a major commit is sometimes, hard to decide because, let's face it, Georgia has been in the business of getting a lot of big-time commitments for a very long time. And obviously last week when Georgia goes out and beats the Florida Gators for a guy like Harris, obviously everybody's reacting in such a big way to that. That's kind of like one of those things that had Georgia fans buzzing for a couple of days here. I want you to know, though, that in the case of Allen, while it may seem like the buzz is slightly smaller than it was for Harris there last week, the truth is this is in its own right a very big commitment there for the Georgia Bulldogs. And it's the kind of thing that ought to generate its own level of excitement. How do you compare to other commits? I don't know that I necessarily want to do that, but for a Georgia program that's used to getting a lot of guys who are kind of in that sort of like 4-star, top 150 player in the country type range, you don't ever really get tired of it. You don't ever really get, to the point where you kind of overlook it or disregard it. And I think that's the case with Allen. So that's just kind of one of the thoughts that I had there on that. There are also 4 other thoughts that I want to share quickly about Georgia adding this 4-star linebacker, C.J. Allen, to the fold. I like the way in which this was rolled out last night, and this may seem like a small thing, but to me, it's one of those things that kind of matters. I've told you before that Georgia's one of those programs that on the field is so businesslike, and Kirby Smart himself is a very all-business type coach. You don't see Smart, making, goofy things on social media the way that, like, let's say Lane Kiffin does, or you don't see a lot of, just a lot of silliness, tomfoolery, if you will, from the program on a regular basis. This is a program that's kind of taken on a little bit of a serious demeanor. They take a very edgy, business-like approach to their action on the field, and I think most of us would say that is a mindset that has worked well for Georgia on the field. But you may have also heard me say in the past that if you're going to be that business-like between the white lines, you got to try to find a way to have a little bit of fun around the periphery. You got to try to find a way to have a little bit of fun when you can, because let's face it, on the field, Georgia has decided that winning is fun, and it's going to do whatever it takes to win there on the field, which means grinding pretty hard, which means having a head coach that's kind of always in the midst of that grind and thinking ahead of the next thing, or knee deep in the thing that he's currently doing. And sometimes the Kirby Smart press conferences, his public face is not always the most sort of touchy-feely type thing in the world. So when you can have some fun, probably important to do that. And I thought yesterday, in the way in which the Allen thing was rolled out, was an example of this. Or I should say, the Allen thing was rolled out yesterday, kind of an example of this. And it was also kind of against the typical norm here on this. Like a lot of times, whether it be media or coaches or whatever else, when a recruit is getting ready to make his announcement, this is one of those things where it's almost like complete radio silence. Nobody wants to, like, as they say, spoil the announcement. That's kind of always been the mindset that's out there. You kind of clear the runway. You let the recruit announce this on his own terms, in his own way, and nobody tries to spoil this or hint at this really whatsoever. Well, yesterday you had a little bit of a different type of thing on that, where there was a little bit of like internet buzz leading up to Georgia making some sort of announcement, including Glenn Schumann, the obvious linebackers coach, who's obviously so instrumental in a thing like this. Schumann kind of had this yesterday where he sort of tweeted the Kirby Smart popcorn gif with the eyeball emoji, kind of setting the stage for Allen doing what he's doing. And I said before, to me, this is an example of being kind of fun here. And it's an example of Georgia that's going to be very businesslike in its approach on the field, finding a way to have some fun in recruiting. And for someone who enjoys the drama of all of this and the soap opera that can kind of be around the recruiting process a bit, to think that, Georgia's kind of embracing that more with the way in which Allen made his announcement yesterday, I think that's probably a pretty good thing, all said and done here. I didn't mind that whatsoever. Here's the other thing I think we notice about Allen coming to Georgia is you can't help but deny, or you shouldn't deny anyway. We showed you a Glenn Schumann there a moment ago, that Allen enters into a position group at Georgia that has had, as direct a pipeline as you can get to the NFL. And this is every kind of, type of NFL player you can have, whether it be, Biletnikoff winner like Roquan Smith, who went right to the front end of the first round, or a Biletnikoff winner like Nakobe Dean, who may have been disrespected on draft night but still has a big career ahead of him. A guy like Tay Crowder, who for a long time played without very much in the way of accolades and yet found his way into the NFL draft and has found himself a home in the NFL. Guys like Monty Rice, who just sort of always seem to play the position the right way, doing the way that it's supposed to be done. When you think about a very young coach, and I know Connor Riley, who will join us later on, who wrote about Glenn Schumann for DawgNation.com this morning, but you can't help but notice all of this, that for a very young coach who had no coaching experience whatsoever before he got to UGA, the fact that he has not only won the kinds of recruiting battles that he's won, but he has such a high batting average in terms of taking these players, putting them into the NFL. Quay Walker, Channing Tindall, you can add their names into a discussion like that. Hard not to notice the way in which Schumann's star has just risen as a coach, and hard to have a much more successful start to a coaching career than what Schumann has had. And of course, when you have that kind of success, when you have bred the kind of NFL prospects that Georgia seems to at the linebacker position, it is going to create a lot of a lot of interest in that program. And I think one of the biggest cliches that you can have about recruiting is, the spots are tight. There's more players and you have room available for them. And oftentimes that's an exaggeration. But for Georgia at the linebacker spot right now, I'm not quite so sure that is such an exaggeration. That right now Georgia seems like it has room for, after the commitment of Allen, maybe a couple of more linebackers here. And you think about Tony Rojas, who's obviously a Penn State commit, or Riley Wilson, who's a Michigan commit, or Trey Bowles, obviously a guy that Georgia fans like a lot, with Weeks, who was just on campus there a moment ago. That you're looking at a long list of linebackers that Georgia fans have developed some affection for. The Georgia coaches, in some respects, seem to have great respect for, and you don't have room for all of them. And so I think one of the interesting things that's going to play out here in the weeks to come is, who are those linebackers who are either prioritizing Georgia or being prioritized by Georgia for the couple of remaining spots you might have on the heels of Allen announcing his pledge there yesterday. So that for me is 4 thoughts quickly on the commitment of C.J. Allen to Georgia. I want to add a final one here for a moment. And this is one of those things that maybe only I notice, or maybe this is only interesting to me. I'll certainly grant you that. But I find it fascinating that in terms of the kinds of positions that generate chatter in football, the fact that the inside linebacker spot, I believe, relative to its actual value, continues to be pretty underrated. So when you think about places you want to have those big recruiting wins, if you base this on, the kind of positions that generate the most chatter, sometimes it seems like certainly edge rusher, and you understand why, lockdown cornerback, you understand why. Those are positions that seem to always gravitate towards the front end of the NFL draft, that generate big-time interest in free agency when those guys become available in the open market, and certainly get fans really excited from a recruiting standpoint there as well when your college team has a chance to add one. Sometimes it seems that the inside linebacker spot seems to lag behind a little bit in terms of the overall interest when it comes to that discussion. Certainly from an NFL draft standpoint, we know that's true. Nakobe Dean was unfortunate on the receiving end of that going back to April, we think unfairly, but nonetheless, that's kind of what happened. That's kind of the way that it played itself out. And yet when I watch football, both the college and the pro level, I continue to see the very best teams in the country, the very best teams in the league, if you think about on Sundays. I continue to see those types of teams having very good inside linebacker play. I've told you before, I don't think it's a coincidence necessarily that when you look at the two very best defenses in the Kirby Smart era, you have great inside linebacker play from both those teams. And by great, I mean truly great, not figuratively speaking, but literally great play from Roquan in 2017, from Nakobe this past season. And when you think about, future Georgia defenses, which I also certainly think have a chance to be stellar in their own right, the assumption that you would make is that captain, that field general in the middle of the field as an inside linebacker, that's one of those things you also expect to see there as well. And by the way, it's not just true for Georgia where this happens. I mentioned Trey Bowles a moment ago. His father, Todd Bowles, the coach of the Tampa Bay Bucks, was talking about Devin White the other day. And I want to read this to you there a little bit. Bowles was talking about the evolution of White as a player and what he did a couple of years ago when Tampa won the Super Bowl, and kind of trying to refine that, same level of success this past season. But this is what Todd Bowles, and this is certainly a name that's relevant here because of Georgia's pursuit of Trey Bowles. This is what Todd Bowles said about Devin White. And this, to me, sort of speaks to why winning battles like great inside linebackers, including the one that Georgia won yesterday for C.J. Allen, might matter so much. I'm not going to show this on the screen. I'm just going to read it to you. Bowles says of Devin White, he's our tone setter. He's one of those guys that you have to let be a football player. I'm not saying he's Ray Lewis or Mike Singletary, but he's one of those guys that's very confident in his ability. He's very good at what he does. And you have to just let him play. I think we're getting back to that more, letting him play, but understanding where he has to be at certain times. I love that phrase there from Todd Bowles and talking about Devin White, who you may remember from obviously from LSU and has also gone on to a great career with the Bucks. The idea that inside linebacker is the tone setter. It's the kind of player, when the position is played well by a smart guy who's got the athleticism, that you can just turn him loose and let him do his thing. That's what we've seen if you watch the NFL. That's what Devin White has done at his best for the Bucs, and it's certainly what guys like Nakobe Dean and Roquan Smith have done for UGA there as well. And Glenn Schumann's ability to kind of find the players who can become that, but also cultivate that talent while they are on campus, is one of the reasons why this is such a hot position there at UGA. C.J. Allen, just the latest in that line, but you get the sense before the 2023 cycle is done, there may be some other big names added into this category there as well. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. We start at 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com and on the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, continuing on, of course, DawgNation.com, but introducing all the other video platforms there as well, Facebook and YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, all kinds of ways to watch the show in video. We're glad that you do that with us. Of course, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcasts, wherever you find them, the Apple Player, Spotify, the Google Player, worldfamousDawgNation.com. Just happy to have you with us as we present the show to you here today, and happy to have our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia making it all possible. ESOG, the one you turn to when it comes to foundation waterproofing issues. Let's face it, that's the sign of a serious issue. If you're a homeowner, you see that water creeping in where it's not supposed to be. It seems like we haven't had as much rain lately as we'd like to have, but when it does rain, some of you get met with a lot of anxiety because you've got those puddles starting to form. And like I said, garage, crawl space, you see evidence down your basement. These are all signs of a potential issue, and a reminder to you that you should reach out to my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Same thing when you see those cracks in your wall. Foundation stuff is the kind of thing that needs to be taken care of right away, and maybe you fear the worst on that. But here's the thing you got to understand, is that ESOG is a solutions-based company. The word solutions, after all, is right there in their name. So they're looking to tell you whether the problem you're facing is a big problem or not. If it's a small problem, then they'll just tell you to go to the hardware store and get whatever you might need to fix the thing you might have. But If it's a more substantial issue, and let's face it, sometimes that is the case, you want the team at Engineered Solutions of Georgia on the job because they've got a full team of engineers on staff ready to help you. There's nobody else in the market that can say that. Those kinds of resources available for you. They're also proud partners of UGA, which makes them fun to do business with. It's kind of always cool to support those that support the dogs, and they're longtime friends of ours here at DawgNation Daily. And sincerely, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate your support of those who help us keep the lights on around here. So we're grateful for all of that. Also, the phone number, very easy to remember there as well. I am not a super smart person, so when things can be simple, I'm grateful for that. And getting in touch with ESOG could not be simpler. To get in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia, simply dial 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now, and that'll get you in touch with my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We're going to get in touch with Connor Riley here coming up with a Kroger Fresh Take with him in just a moment. Before that, though, I want to go around the doghouse. And this is kind of a simple point, and I'll try to make it as simply and succinctly as I possibly can. But as I continue to read up on some of the preseason write-ups that exist around Georgia, here's the one thing you can't deny, is that the ability of Georgia to replace in some form or fashion some of what Georgia lost off last year's team continues to be probably the paramount question facing the program, and it just stands to reason that it would be true. You had 5 first-round picks off one defense, 3 defensive linemen, and that's not even counting what guys like Nakobe Dean, we mentioned a moment ago, what he brought to the program. That replacing some version of that is just a huge issue facing UGA. And as you read up on what certain national media types are saying with the various position groups for Georgia, here's I think the one thing that you're left to conclude is that Georgia is going to be like almost every other team in the country is going to be, where of the 11 guys you're going to have the field at any one point in time, some of those guys are potential superstars. Clearly, Jalen Carter is on the verge of being that, if not already. Nolan Smith, much the same way. I would say Ringo in much the same way. And you may find other guys that are at least, kind of close to that. But, on a given moment, Georgia's going to have some of those elite, high-end level, almost superstar type level players that Georgia's going to have, even still, a handful of those here on this 2022 defense. However, Georgia also, much like every other team in the country, the Clemsons, the Alabamas, the Ohio States, of the 11 guys you have on the field at any given moment, standing next to a superstar, standing next to a future first-round pick, standing next to a future top 10 pick in some cases, you may have a guy who's just a solid starter. And I think one of the things that you can't lose sight of in college football is not everything is All-American. Not everything is, this player's so bad you want to replace him. Sometimes there is just a place for, on a game that requires 22 players on the field at one time, some of those guys, you're just sort of hopeful to get solid starter contribution from. You're sort of hopeful they just kind of fill the void and play at kind of a appropriate level, not rising the level of your very best players, but also not the kind of guy that's going to get you hurt too bad. Some players on the field for you are just going to be solid starters. And you can decide for yourself if that's what Georgia has in a couple of spots here this year. And I think the very fair question to that is, will be solid starters, guys who are not superstar level players, they can be exploited. That's the kind of player that certain teams are going to want to try to pick apart. They're going to try to scheme to put that guy in conflict and give themselves a chance to take advantage of the player that's below the caliber of a Jalen Carter or a Nolan Smith or a Ringo. And that may very well be true. So if you're Georgia, how do you prevent that from happening? How do you prevent the guys that might not quite be at the 5 first-round draft pick level that last year's defense was? How do you prevent those players who may just be solid starter level players, and Georgia, like everybody else, may have a couple of those this season? How do you prevent that from becoming a problem for you, from those particular guys from getting exploited too much while all of a sudden opposing offenses are getting over on you? And to me, this is what it comes down to. And when I can keep things simple, I try to, because if it's too complicated, I won't be able to understand it. So to me, this is the simple story for the Georgia defense this season. Replacing all that replaced a year ago, the thing that you've got to match, at least in some form or fashion, is you've got to find a way to generate pass rush. If you're concerned about your cornerback starter opposite Ringo or your safety starter opposite Christopher Smith, or your inside linebacker spot because you lost 3 draft picks off that, if you're concerned about any of those areas defensively, the way to mitigate against those concerns, the way to bolster a defense that may have a handful of players who are playing below the all-SEC level is make sure your pass rush remains solid. Now, last year, Georgia knocked on the door of getting 50 sacks. That's a really big number. You probably don't have to match that again for the upcoming season, but you better find a way to get 40. 40 has always been a little bit of a magic number for us. That teams, when they're really getting it done from a pass rush standpoint, 40 just seems to be the threshold they cross over. Something in the 30s, which Georgia has been in a few times before, kind of doesn't really feel like enough. 40 feels like enough to be truly impactful. I don't think you have to look very far to see this. Let's go back to last season. Think about postseason here, prior to the national championship. You had the SEC championship game against Alabama, where Georgia played, frankly, pretty lousy. You had the national semifinal game in the Orange Bowl against Michigan, where Georgia was dominant from the word go. What was the difference between those two games other than the nature of the opponent that Georgia was playing? Because you got to factor that into that there as well. But the difference between those two games was the presence of the pass rush. Georgia just found a way to get to the quarterback against Michigan in a way they were not able to get to the quarterback against Alabama. And the tone of the games felt so differently because of that. In fact, you want to go back to last winter, Smart leading the national championship game, he talked about that. He talked about the fact that, hey, Georgia just did get to quarterbacks better against Michigan than it had against Alabama there in December, and therefore the entire tenor of the game felt different because of that. That's what Kirby Smart said back in January. Here he is.
We practice against good rushers each day. Jamari and Warren, they listen to everybody talk about those guys rushing. And, Jamari and Warren are good pass protectors. They do a nice job. Defensively, we generated some better rush. We have to be able to do that to be successful. Was it a magic potion? I don't think it was a magic potion. We called a lot of the same calls, we called against Alabama. But the quarterback probably didn't escape as good as Alabama's did, and we finished a little better.
Don't you love that phrase? We have to be able to do that to be successful. That was true for Georgia in the 2021 postseason. That's true for Georgia heading into the 2022 season there as well. There is a lot of departed talent off this Georgia roster. And the way to help new guys get more comfortable in new roles and expanded roles, more important snaps being played, greater number of snaps they've played in the past, more being asked from them. The way to allow those guys some space and some time to get comfortable doing that is to make sure Georgia maintains some semblance of a pass rush the way that it had a year ago for almost every game that it played, including that Michigan game in the Orange Bowl, which gave Georgia its chance to go win the national championship. Kirby Smart says it in no uncertain terms. We have to be able to do that. That was true last year. I think it remains true this year there as well. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Before we're done, there are a couple of very big recruiting stories, not really involving UGA, kind of outside the footprint here of DawgNation. We'll cover those and tell you what that might mean about the sport here in the current state we are, summer of 2022. So we'll do that. Then we also have a funny golden shoe for you there as well. But before that, everything on and off the field for Georgia, including the big commitment yesterday from linebacker C.J. Allen. Let's cover all of that with Connor Riley as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take right now here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Of course, Connor, following the news yesterday very closely, C.J. Allen's commitment to the Dogs. He also had a great story this morning at DawgNation.com about the role that Glenn Schumann has played in this and the great success that Georgia linebackers have had on the field there as well. Connor, I want to cover all that with you. Here's a part of a Kroger Fresh Take. But before kind of sort of get into the weeds on that, I think the most fascinating part of adding Allen, a very good player, the kind of guy that Georgia's always going to want in every situation, is what this means for the other dominoes at the linebacker spot, because right now Georgia seems to have more players of interest. Certainly fans have some favorites here in this discussion, and there are more of these names available than there are spots available. Whether it be Rojas, the Penn State commit, or Raylan Wilson, the Michigan commit. There's been a little bit of a move lately, it would seem, for Whit Weeks, who's obviously, kind of from the Oconee County area. Who am I leaving out here? Oh, yeah, Trey Bowles. Maybe that may be the number one fan favorite of all right now. That there's a lot of linebackers that Georgia fans have kind of sort of fallen in love with here a little bit. But there are only a couple spots left here at this spot for UGA. How is the rest of this going to play out in the aftermath of Allen making his choice yesterday?
Yeah, I think I don't want to call Allen the top target for Georgia in terms of linebacker, but it felt like Georgia very clearly made him a priority. And I think, you and I following this and talking with Jeff Sintel felt for a while that Allen was the guy that Georgia really, really wanted in this class. And so from there, Georgia's going to have some decisions to make, and it's a nice spot to be in. And it speaks to what, as you sort of touched on earlier, Glenn Schumann has been able to do at Georgia to get to a place where, you've got 5, really, really talented linebacker prospects who all want to come play for you. And the reality is you're just not going to take 5 inside linebackers in one class. And so it's going to be really interesting to see the choices that get made here in terms of who ends up picking it and coming to the school at Georgia, because, let's look back to, I want to say the 2020 recruiting cycle. Georgia was only going to take 1 edge rusher in that cycle. And they took MJ Sherman because that was a guy that they had zeroed in on early in the recruiting process. And there was another player in the state that year who ended up being a 5-star. And last year, Will Anderson was that player. Happened to be probably one of the best, if not the best, defensive player in college football. So it's a tricky needle to thread in terms of some of these decisions that are going to have to be made. But at the end of the day, it's still a pretty great spot to be in terms of making your selections and having these guys available. You'd much rather be in this position than, say, a Florida or, a Texas, where you're trying to chase after these guys and get them on the campus and just have a shot at them.
I think the Schumann part of this is really fascinating because, Connor, he's still really young, and he was very young when Kirby Smart tabbed him to be on his first staff. There'd only been an analyst there at Alabama. But when you look at the batting average of success, how many guys in the whole world are doing better than he is in terms of, bringing in major recruits, turning a lot of those guys in just the last few years alone into really pretty impressive draft picks. Glenn Schumann is remarkably successful at a very early age. And I know that people kind of hear us always sort of praising these Georgia assistants, maybe kind of goes in one ear and out the other. But you don't get to be the kind of program that Georgia is unless you have a lot of assistant coaches who are really kind of punching above their weight. And I think that that's what Schumann has done. It's really amazing how many draft picks he's had, but also how many of these recruiting battles he continues to win on the heels of that draft success. Georgia is very, very good at the inside linebacker position, seemingly every single year. And the guy that's helped propel that is himself a very young coach. This is a truly remarkable success story, I believe.
Yeah, Georgia fans have known who Glenn Schumann is and know, I think, how valuable he's been to this program. Very, very quickly in the next, I would say, year or two, the rest of college football is going to understand who Glenn Schumann is and why he is such a coveted coach. And ultimately, I think, one day he's going to be a head coach in the SEC. And in terms of evaluating assistants, I think that's probably about the highest level of praise you could give to someone. He understands how this program works. I think in terms of the way he thinks, in terms of the way he goes about, interacting with players, there is a lot of Kirby Smart in him. And I would just point out, going into his age 32 season, this was at Alabama. This was the second year there, first year as the defensive coordinator. Glenn Schumann's age 32 season at Georgia is going to be the co-defensive coordinator, but I think he's going to have a little bit more responsibility than maybe that co-defensive coordinator title follows there. And so he's a guy who, again, wasn't a well-known name when Georgia brought him in. Sort of similar to Todd Hartley in that sense, who we just saw got a big extension and raise last week, which feels like 8 news cycles ago at this point in time with everything that's happened in Georgia in the past week. But I think it shows, Glenn Schumann is a guy who's climbed the ladder and gradually improved. It helps when you inherit Roquan Smith in that linebacker room, but it hasn't just been, the tip-top guys, the star recruits that have turned into really good players. Tate Crowder was a 2-star recruit that nobody thought all that much of. Monty Rice was a guy who Georgia and LSU were battling for, but wasn't some slam dunk, no doubt about it, 3rd-round NFL draft pick. And even a guy like Channing Tindall was a guy who never played inside linebacker prior to getting to Georgia and ultimately ends up becoming a 3rd-round pick after spending 4 years and ultimately also never starting at Georgia. I think that speaks to how highly NFL people value what Schumann is as a teacher, as a developer. And he's also a pretty darn good recruiter. And I'll tell you this, Monty Rice told us 2 years ago that there isn't a smarter coach on this Georgia coaching staff than Glenn Schumann. So I'm really interested to see what he does this year from a defensive coordinator standpoint.
How much tougher do you think his job is going to be, as you said, moving into kind of a defensive coordinator role. We still don't quite know how all those responsibilities are going to be divided up, but it's fair to point out that, I think that Georgia's outside linebacker recruiting changed a little bit when Lanning took on more responsibility. I'm not saying it necessarily got worse. I'm just saying it was a little bit different. And, for Glenn Schumann, who's been really good at the job he has had, well, this upcoming year, I think you're led to believe he's going to have a pretty different job than he's had before. Do you think there's a noticeable difference there in terms of, the kinds of recruits that Georgia is able to win with here moving forward, the kind of impact that Schumann is going to have on his position that he coaches, the inside linebacker spot? What's it going to be like for him growing into a bigger role, you think?
Yeah, it's hard. But again, Kirby Smart has been very tight-lipped about, how this defense is going to work in terms of how much Will Muschamp is doing, how much Glenn Schumann is doing. And, of course, it's always going to be a collaborative effort there. But with all that Georgia has to replace at that inside linebacker position, more so than even the defensive line, I really am interested year one. I would say Glenn Schumann is probably going to be a little bit more involved with the inside linebackers, whereas year two, year three, in this sort of defensive coordinator role that he's currently in, I do think maybe, as you point out, with Dan Lanning, he becomes a little bit less involved with that. But because of the turnover at linebacker, specifically in this offseason and the loss of experience they have there, maybe this year that he's still holding the reins to that inside linebacker room a little bit tighter, whereas over time, and also as he just sort of gets more comfortable with the responsibilities that come with being that defensive coordinator at Georgia, maybe then it shifts. But I think right now, I think he's still going to be very involved with that inside linebacker room, as I think we've seen in this recruiting class.
Any take from you on Arch Manning's visit to Texas over the weekend? Obviously, the tight end making the commitment to Texas while Manning was there. Manning's teammate from Isidore Newman gets some attention. National media seems to think he's going to Texas. That's kind of been true the entire time. That has zero impact on me whatsoever. But, what do you notice, if anything, about Manning's visit to Austin over the weekend?
Yeah, I personally don't put a whole lot of stock in, his friend and teammate Will Randall committing to Texas, because that's not something that factors into a decision that the Manning family would make. And ultimately, I don't know how much these sway these visits ultimately have on Manning. Again, this is the number one football family in the South. They understand this is not a 4-year decision. This is a 40-year rest of your life decision. And so I think on the one hand, anyone that tells you they know what Arch Manning is doing is just, I think, cloud chasing at this point, because nobody truly knows, because he is, so under wraps and kept it so close to the vest in terms of his recruitment. The guy doesn't share anything on social media. Updates are rather hard to come by. And, I akin his commitment status to something like when the Pope is selected. There'll be a puff of white smoke coming out, and we'll find out, know who it is, and sort of go from there. I am interested in sort of what the timeline ultimately is. And in talking with Justin Talamas, it seems like it's July. I do wonder if the longer it goes into the season, I actually maybe think that might help Georgia a little bit, because that would mean that maybe just because Texas is such just an interesting program right now. They went 5-7 and lost 6 straight games last year. They lost to Kansas in year one. And I don't think Arch wants to go to a program that isn't stable and doesn't have the winning there. And so if he still has questions, that Manning family still has questions about what Texas is going to be able to do in terms of its long-term trajectory and the trajectory over the course of Arch's career there, I do understand them potentially waiting out and seeing what Texas does. Of course, that doesn't mean, you can still make that commitment and then change your mind down the road, obviously. But I do think maybe the longer this goes, potentially the better that is for the University of Georgia.
So I'm going to ask you an unfair question, and the reason why this is unfair is because it wouldn't be admissible in a court of law, because it goes to state of mind. But you mentioned a moment ago that you don't think anyone knows what Manning is going to do. Do you think Manning himself knows what he's going to do, or is his deliberation continuing because he's trying to decide? Inside Manning's head right now, do you think he already knows the decision he's going to make?
I would say no, but again, this is because, we know so little about who Arch Manning is. And I'm one of those people who, if I know I'm going to do something, I make it known that I'm doing it. I would like to think that with all the hoopla and all the, the questions that come with his recruitment, if he truly knew what he was going to do, he'd probably want to get it over with, just because I think more often than not, committed recruits are much quieter than uncommitted recruits. And so I think if he did truly know where he wanted to go and what he wanted to do. I do sort of think, especially with the throwback nature that the Manning family has wanted with this recruitment, that if he knew where he wanted to go and he knew where he wanted to play, he'd probably already be there. Given, he's been to Georgia, I think, 4 times now. He's been to Texas 4 times now. He's been to Alabama multiple times there as well. I'm not sure what all more he would want to see if he had already made up his mind and had that decision made. So I don't think, as it stands right now on, I guess, June 21st, that Arch Manning fully knows what he wants to do.
So, speaking of Manning, I saw the story. I know our buddy Michael Carvel had also brought this to DawgNation for us, that Stetson Bennett's going to be part of the Manning Passing Academy. It's a thing that happens every single year. It's really for high school recruits, but the college quarterbacks get a chance to be counselors. They also compete against each other there a little bit there, too. I find this to be kind of interesting. I don't know that it's necessarily all that important necessarily, but I still kind of find this to be somewhat compelling that a guy like Bennett going into such a pivotal year for him, the kind of final year for him to write his legacy there at Georgia, going to get a chance to spend some time around other great quarterbacks. What do you think of Bennett's presence at a place like this? Does it help him get ready for the upcoming year in any way?
Yeah, and I think it establishes him, as a name and as someone to be taken more seriously, something that the national media very clearly has not done with Stetson Bennett. Instead, focusing more on his story and all that he's got, all that he's been through to get to this point, instead of his actual game and what he does well. And I will ask you this though, do we think Stetson Bennett is there if Georgia doesn't win the national championship last year?
No, probably not. Now, there are like 40-something guys going to be there, so this isn't exactly the most exclusive club in the world. But my guess is if he's not the national championship quarterback, even if Georgia lost like by 1 point in the national title game, I think it would have been easier to exclude him. But being the quarterback of the reigning national champion probably does give him some extra cachet there, I would probably say.
Yeah, and I would say I'd probably agree with you on that point there. And so, again, Stetson Bennett is a guy, and one of the things that's sort of been eschewed this offseason, nobody assumed he could get better last year in year 2 under Todd Monken, and that's exactly what he did. Say what you want about him, but he was clearly a better quarterback in 2021 than he was in 2020. Why can't he make similar improvements and get better again in a third year under Todd Monken like he did a season ago? We naturally project growth on just about every other player. We assume Jalen Carter is going to get better in year 3. We assume Keely Ringo is going to get better this year. We assume just about every player on this roster is going to get better going into this next season. Why is Stetson Bennett not given the same benefit of doubt there?
Yeah, I mean, I think people – the answer to the question is I think people just see limitations that might stand in his way of being able to do that, some physical limitations. But I am more likely to agree with your premise that I do believe there is a level of achievement that he has not yet attained, which I do think is possible for him. I do think he could play better in 2022 than he played in 2021. I guess, Connor, where the Manning thing becomes interesting for me is part of me sort of internally debates what the mindset for him that would be necessary to do that would be, because I think it's pretty obvious that Stetson kind of goes around a little bit of a chip on his shoulder because he has been so doubted. In some cases, he's even been doubted by his own team. The coaching staff itself has kind of kicked him to the curb here a couple of times. He's even been doubted by them, and I think he's kind of fueled by that doubt a little bit. But if you're going to the Manning Passing Academy, and if you've got posted Heisman odds, even if they're really long shot odds, you're not quite as doubted anymore as you used to be. So it's almost like I can't quite decide, should Stetson continue to be the guy that sort of goes out there ready to fight because nobody believes in him, or should he be the guy that embraces, no, now you are the guy. You were sort of treated as the unquestioned starter for Georgia this spring, something you have not been before. Which of those mindsets is the right mindset for Bennett? Maybe there's no way we can know this, but which of those mindsets is the right mindset? Should he embrace being the guy that's going to a prestigious camp like this, or should he embrace being the guy who was doubted the way that he has been the last couple of years? Which is the right frame of mind for Stetson to put himself into, you think?
I would say it's probably a combination of the two there. You want to have that internal confidence in yourself that the rest of the team believes in me, but at the same point in time, Stetson got here because of that chip on his shoulder. And so I think in interacting with Stetson and speaking with him a couple of times, I do think he's going to continue probably to lean more of that chip on his shoulder side because, quite frankly, he's still getting a lot of flack and being discounted quite often, and certainly more often than a national championship quarterback should be, in my personal opinion. And so I do think that chip on the shoulder sort of mantra mentality is going to continue to carry him. And, I don't know at what point, eventually that goes away. You look at a guy like Baker Mayfield, it arguably never goes away if you carry it long enough and it's a big enough chip. But I will also say this, Stetson Bennett has also had plenty of confidence in himself. It says something for him to want to come back and be a scholarship QB here and have the belief in himself that ultimately he's going to get on the field, and that's exactly what he did. It says something after the year he had in 2020 to sort of stay with this program, come back, and ultimately then go on and lead Georgia to a national championship. So I do think it says something about his confidence and his innate ability in himself that, he can still have all that doubt and have that big chip on his shoulder. I won't give any free sponsorships here, but, a very tasty, big-sized chip on his shoulder.
Sure.
And still come out and do what he needs to do and be the player that he wants to be.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. By the way, speaking to some chips, great chance to get some chips for your summer party coming up with our friends at Kroger. Summer is here, and Kroger's got you covered on all of that. In fact, when it comes to grilling there as well to go along with those chips, Kroger's got you on all that there as well. You can turn up the heat and the flavor with new favorites for every dish. This summer, go to Kroger.com go to the Kroger in-store or Kroger.com grilling to learn more about that. All kinds of outdoor fun being had, and Kroger right there in the middle of all of that. Connor, how'd you like that transition?
That's one of your better ones I've ever heard.
I appreciate that. Hey, let me finish with this. I talked about the Georgia defense just before you joined us, and to me, I don't think there's any doubt that Georgia this year, like every team in the country, is going to have a couple of guys who you're sort of hopeful they're just solid starters. Like, this isn't fantasy football where you have 11 all-stars at every position. Almost every team's got a couple of pretty high-end players. The best teams have more than a couple. But even the very best teams in the country, the Ohio States, the Alabamas, the Clemsons, there are going to be a couple of guys on the field who are not necessarily all-American level players. You just sort of hopeful they fill a void for you. And I don't think that Georgia's any different this year. Maybe Georgia's more that way this year because of all the players they lost off last year's roster. That's just a reality, that in some cases of the 11 guys you have on the field, one or two of those guys are just sort of plug-in, solid starter. That's what you're hopeful they are. But kind of I'm a big believer that if the pass rush is at least somewhat replicated to what it was a year ago, you can mitigate against that, and you can cover up whatever potential weakness you might have as long as you're making life tough on opposing quarterbacks. And for me, this upcoming season, it's as simple as that for the Georgia defense. What's your kind of thought on that side of the ball here for the moment?
Yeah, Georgia had, I believe, 49 sacks a season ago. David Lee's got to get over 40,
Yep.
I think, to have the sort of season they want to have. And, we've thrown that number out a while.
Yep.
In multiple seasons. I do think that they have the personnel there to get it. I think Nolan Smith, if maybe they ask him to do a little bit less in terms of, his role as an outside linebacker and say, hey, more often than not, we're going to need you to just go get the quarterback now. Robert Beal is a guy who I thought really impressed down the stretch run last season, especially in terms of his ability to get after the quarterback. We know in years past, Georgia's been very aggressive with blitzing their off-ball linebackers in terms of getting production from them from sacks. I'm really interested to see how Jamon Dumas-Johnson, Tresman Marshall, Smil Munden factor into that there. And so, you've got to find a way to get to 40 sacks, I think, to really cover up some of the weaknesses that exist on this Georgia defense, especially there in the back end. We don't know what that starting cornerback is going to look like opposite Keely Ringo. That safety spot opposite Chris Smith, I have no idea what that's going to look like. And that's probably my biggest concern with this defense this year. And so, I think if you tell me there's a pass rush, that Nolan Smith is a guy that pushes 8, 9, maybe 10 sacks. I think Robert Beal could potentially do something similar this year, which is something we haven't really seen. So to have two of those sort of type, 7, 8 sack guys. And I think they're going to need Smith and Beal to probably do that, given the turnover that they have at the inside linebacker room and where Georgia's sack production has come from in the past. Along with Jalen Carter there, we haven't really, Trayvon Walker, I think, got 6 sacks a season ago. We'll see if an interior guy like Jalen Carter is able to do something similar and get to that, 5, 6, 7 range.
I think it's exactly right. Connor, great stuff. We love reading your content there at DawgNation.com there as well. Thank you so much for being a part of the program here today. We will look forward to having you back on again very soon as well.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure, man.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, really good stuff from Connor Riley there. Always fun to have him here. Make sure you're reading all the stuff that he's writing for you there at DawgNation.com. he is doing a great job and just sharing great insight on everything going on with UGA there. We're going to pull back big picture here and look at a couple things around the SEC. Before that, though, let me remind you that when we're cruising around the SEC, we're doing so courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. Boy, what a great time this is for you to be on your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. It's just such a fun experience. And, we talked yesterday about some of the great things you're doing on board with entertainment options, but also at some of the places that you're visiting that I think should just get you really excited. And maybe nothing more exciting than that Perfect Day Coco Cay, that private island right there in the Bahamas that is just about as much fun and about as really amazing an experience as you're ever going to have. You got the thrill side with the water park, tallest water slide in North America, as a for instance. You get the chill side where everybody's just kind of hanging out, relaxing. Largest freshwater pool in the Bahamas. This is a private destination that is a part of so many of the different Royal Caribbean cruise itineraries, and it's one of the things that probably gets me as excited about taking a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation as almost anything. When I am beginning my search for my next Royal Caribbean cruise, you better believe, and this is true, you better believe I am starting by looking at which ships are going to Perfect Day Coco Cay. We'll figure out the rest of the ports after that, but as a first and foremost, my Royal Caribbean cruise vacation's got to be going to Perfect Day Coco Cay. It's a non-starter for me otherwise. That's how much I love being a part of that beautiful private island right there in the Bahamas, and you only get that on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. So make sure you check out our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority. They can help you get booked up on this. You can find them online, tcava.com. That's tcava.com. You can also give them a call, 770-952-8300. That's 770-952-8300. They'll get you hooked up on all of that. You can enjoy your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation here in 2022. All right, a couple of pieces of recruiting news to get to you here for a moment. This does not really involve UGA necessarily, but I think it's going to be interesting for Georgia fans. Let me begin with this. Yesterday, 5-star wide receiver Carnell Tate chose Ohio State over Tennessee. Now, a couple of things for me interesting about Tate and his decision here. First and foremost, the Ohio State Buckeyes, and by the way, nice look there at Tate and a good-looking edit there going to Ohio. You see Brian Hartline, the Ohio State receivers coach there on the screen there with him. Obviously, they've had a lot of Biletnikoff Award winners, and they're kind of celebrating a lot of that. But when you look at success at a position group, I mean, we don't like the Buckeyes around here. Very few fans do if you're not an Ohio State fan. But you got to acknowledge what Ohio State has done. We may bring that music down just slightly. But what Ohio State has done at the wide receiver position is just remarkable. And obviously, they've got the market cornered on other great receivers, including a guy like Tate here right now. And I do think it's going to be interesting to see what this means for Ohio State in terms of its on-field success. No one's producing better wide receiver play. We are certainly in a day and age when that seems to really matter. Obviously, recruits like Tate are noticing that. But last year, Ohio State missed out on the college football playoff after having a very explosive offense. This season, they are one of the odds-on favorite to be expected to be in the playoff here this year. They're certainly the clear favorite in the Big Ten. But last year, the lack of physicality kind of hurt them a bit when they had to play Michigan in a road game there, near at the very end of the regular season. So what does Ohio State's ability to corner the market at the receiver spot actually mean for them on the field? We're about to find that out. But there's no doubt there's really nobody recruiting better talent, developing that talent better than Ohio State is when it comes to this position. You sort of have to take your hat off to that. They have dominated when it comes to receivers, and you don't really see that slowing down anytime soon. On the flip side of that, this is a recruiting battle that, Tennessee was really hoping it might have a chance to win. They were really hoping to be a factor in the Tate recruitment, and ultimately he probably ended up making the decision that most people thought he was going to make there on that. And, listen, one of the things I kind of find to be interesting about the Tennessee part in discussions like this is that for all the effort they've made to be a major player in the NIL game, think about the rumors around Nico Iamaleava and all that kind of stuff, the quarterback commit they have for the class of 2023. Thus far, it doesn't seem like their impact in terms of the kind of attention that they're getting is maybe as substantial as they hoped it would be. I mean, when you think about the big NIL guys, it's fans talking about Texas A&M, it's fans talking about Miami, even to a degree, sometimes talking about USC, although it's difficult to tell how built out the infrastructure really is when it comes to the program out there in Los Angeles. But Tennessee kind of wants to be a player in all of this, but it kind of quite hasn't happened as of yet. I even joked about this the other day that when Nick Saban was kind of going on his whiny rant about NIL, he sort of mentioned everybody but Tennessee. If you're a Vols fan, you can't be all that happy about that. That supposedly nobody's got a better collective built up than Tennessee does. And yet right now, beyond Iamaliva, you don't really see a lot of tangible benefit to that. Now, there's still a long way to go in the 2023 cycle, and that could very well change here soon. But this is the kind of example of, on the heels of getting a big-time quarterback commit, that you were sort of hoping to win with some of these wide receivers. And important to note that Tennessee really had a hard time elbowing its way in along the lines of Ohio State in a recruiting battle for a guy like Carnell Tate. Another piece of recruiting news, and speaking of NIL, you have to assume this must factor prominently here. 5-star running back Reuben Owens has committed to Louisville. Now, you may remember a few weeks ago on the show we talked about Owens was supposed to be taking a visit to Georgia, kind of canceled that visit. He had officials at the time scheduled to like TCU and Louisville, and you're kind of left to wonder where his process kind of stood. Well, he ends up making what I think when it comes to being a big time prospect here in the 2023 cycle, a pretty surprising decision to go to a place like Louisville. We've had a long period of time now where almost all the 5-star recruits in the country were gravitating towards a very small number of programs, obviously Georgia being one of them. I think some of the folks nationally are kind of left to ask the question of, well, does Owens going to Louisville mean we're about to see more parity in terms of the kinds of places that 5-star recruits are choosing to go? Maybe we'll see an example of that in the rest of this 2023 cycle. Maybe this itself is just an outlier on that. But I think this kind of speaks to some of the challenge that exists when it comes to recruits making the decision about where they go and programs and boosters of those programs making a decision about how to spend their NIL money. Like, I mean, listen, I think Owens is a very good player, but I think that Louisville is really a decidedly average program. And, if Owens goes on to be the kind of running back that many people assume that he probably would be because of the rating that he has, like, how much of a difference does that really make for Louisville? I mean, is Reuben Owens going to be better for Louisville than Jahmyr Gibbs was for Georgia Tech? And you saw what that meant for Tech in terms of its on-field success in the ACC these last couple of years. Great running back, but very little connection to any kind of wins whatsoever. So if you're a Louisville booster, you've spent this money presumably to get Owens in the program. What happens when he gains 1,300 yards, but Louisville goes 5-7 or 7-5 or 6-6 or whatever their records have kind of been there as of late? Like, how happy are you to have a great player if that great player alone is not enough to propel you to more wins? And I think we in the ACC have seen that the presence of a great running back alone is not necessarily enough to get all that done. And if you're Owens, like, how much money is worth it? And listen, obviously, if you're going to pay me a whole bunch of money, I might be willing to do a lot of things. But how much money is worth it to kind of put yourself into sort of an irrelevant place for your college career, especially when you've only got so many carries to give and you give those to a college team? Man, I hope you got a bunch of money for doing so, because those are carries you could be giving to some future NFL team or, as a part of some sort of college program that's truly in contention for a playoff berth or a national championship or something like that. As a running back, you've just got kind of a finite shelf life. And if you're giving those over to Louisville to go scuffling in the middle portion of the ACC, I hope when it's all said and done, that's a decision that you're glad that you made. Now, some people have kind of cynically said, hey, go ahead and take the NIL money for Louisville now, transfer a little bit later on, and get some money from somebody else later on. And maybe that's what this ends up being. And if he just wants to play for Louisville, then I got no beef with him on that if that's just the choice that he wants to make. But we are in kind of a very experimental phase of college football. How much money would be worth it to you to play on an irrelevant team? Louisville probably will continue to be. And how much money is a booster to be worth to you to have a great player that's not really raising the fortunes of your program overall? If that's the way this plays out, I think checking back in on this a year or two from now is probably worth doing. But for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And there was a video that got some attention yesterday. I want to make that the subject of our golden shoe here today. Always funny. We can bring that music down just a little bit maybe. But always funny when you have these like gator videos that pop up from time to time. I don't mean Florida gators, although around here we're always enjoying the idea of, gators getting what they deserve. And how about this video here today as far as our golden shoe? I want to thank Alex Lyle for sending this to me. How about this old guy here with just like a frying pan just whacking this gator? Like, that guy is braver than me by a magnitude of about 1,000. Like, there's no way I'm doing that. But look at that gator turning tail and running, though, much the same way the lousy, stinking gators do on the field there as well. That is amazing. But good to see nonetheless. And that's the way it's going to go for the Gators on the field later on this fall. We'll make Alex our golden shoe winner for sending that to me today, and really the old guy for whacking the Gator there as well. How about, speaking of the Gators, how about a Gator Hater updater? Been 4,912 days since Florida has won a national championship. They're getting some whacks on the head on the field a lot these days, it seems. And they've got another one coming in Jacksonville very soon there as well. Our Gator Hater countdown. Dogs back in Jacksonville in even 130 days from right now. We will see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised at the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. I look forward to getting your comments. You want to talk about C.J. Allen here? We'll give you a chance to do that. You want to talk about anything else from today's program or anything else going on with Georgia football? We'll give you a chance to do that there as well. I may start on DawgNation.com here for a moment. DT checks in to say that old guy's got some stones. Yeah, alligators. Here's my theory on alligators. And this is not about the Florida Gators. This is about alligators in general, the actual living creature. I feel like alligators lull you into a false sense of security because alligators are kind of like docile until they're not. Like a lot of times you'll see an alligator in real life and it's just sort of sitting there and it's not really doing anything. I think you're left to believe it's just, it's not capable of doing anything or it's not willing to do anything. And then when alligators really get involved, man, it's a totally different deal. Like you see these like viral videos of like the guy who he's out there fishing in some, swamp water somewhere and he'll like take his beer can and he'll like use the alligator's tooth to, which is, from a, I guess, animal health and safety standpoint, something you shouldn't do, but these videos go viral every now and then. Guy like sort of, slams the beer can against the alligator tooth as a way of like shotgunning the beer. I don't condone any of that, by the way. I'm just saying it's a video that you've seen before. And everybody kind of laughs and thinks that's funny. Alligators are just sort of calm until they're not. Like when they decide they really get involved, it's a totally different deal. Totally different deal. Scott Harris says the guy whacking that gator was wearing the right color for sure. So there you go on that. DT says nothing prehistoric looking lulls me into a false sense of security, and that's the case. Also, some of those like big alligators you see down there in like, say, Florida heading towards the Everglades. Speaking of prehistoric, I mean, some of those things look like dinosaurs. I saw a video the other day of one of these alligators. I guess this is going back earlier in the spring, but some folks were like doing a duck hunt type deal. And, so like they got their kill and this just gigantic, like just like stegosaurus looking alligator comes and takes it from them. I mean, those things are crazy. Somebody also got bit by an alligator in Florida last week or a couple of weeks ago. Hemingway says that Keely Ringo's got a signature play, but let's face it, he needs to be better this year than last, hoping he will be. Yeah, I mean, if you take the national championship game-sealing play away from Ringo, let's say that didn't happen, I think for the most part, Ringo is still getting a good bit of the chatter that he's getting right now. That cornerback is really a position that you grow into. People who are smarter than me, when they talk about the positions where experience matters more than others, defensive secondary, cornerback spot in particular, is very commonly mentioned as a position in which experience really matters. So the path that Ringo is taking is not all that different than the path that other great cornerbacks have taken themselves, where, hey, maybe you spent a little time when you first got on campus trying to feel your way around. In Ringo's case, some of that was about recovering from injury. You had a collection of really, really good moments a year ago, kind of paired with some moments in which, maybe kind of got lost in coverage there a little bit. That's not unexpected for an inexperienced player, which last year Ringo kind of was. And now, moving into year 3 on campus, the athletic credentials that he brings to the table, you've given him the experience to go along with that. Ringo is expected to dominate. And I think people, just because he's so famous because of the national championship play, assume that a lot of what's around him is because of that. But here's what I can tell you. A lot of these, doofuses who are putting him in like mock drafts and things like that, they don't even know that he had an interception in the national championship. Like, that's just not the kind of thing, walking around knowledge that a lot of those folks have. I mean, go look at someone like Phil Steele's All-American list if you want to know how plugged in, some of these national types are to everything that's going on here. And you see some examples of some pretty big blind spots related to all of that. But what is going to get Ringo the attention that he's getting right now is the fact that big body, those long arms with that speed, that is just a tried and true method for making a great cornerback. That when you give some experience to a guy like that who brings those athletic and physical credentials to play, that the end result more often than not is going to be a very good player. Like, I understand that Ringo wasn't perfect a year ago, but on my category of guys that I think of as pretty close to a sure thing for Georgia here this season, Ringo is on my list. Opposite him at cornerback, probably a long way from being on that list. But I have no problem putting Keely Ringo on the list of pretty close to sure things for Georgia here this season. I understand, times last year when that was not the case, but to me, that's just a very expected path for a cornerback. It is a position where experience has mattered, and now he's gotten some, and I think he's going to be even better than he's ever been before. Let's see what else. Beer Cans and Batty says Kirby hates Florida. It's one of my favorite things about Kirby Smart as the Georgia coach, the fact that he does truly have a Georgia alumnus's, is that a proper phrasing there, perspective on UGA rivals. Publicly he's not going to give in on stuff like that. He doesn't like giving a money quote, doesn't like letting people know what he's thinking very much. But his actions tell the tale here. Kirby Smart likes beating Georgia's rivals. I agree. Lesko asks, do you think that Jahmyr Gibbs will make a huge impact at Alabama? He only ran for 1 yard on 2 carries, averaging half a yard against us last year, and Bama's offensive line has some question marks. I mean, statistically speaking, does he have as many stats at Bama as he does Georgia Tech? If you're going to view him from a sort of a fantasy standpoint, I might downgrade the overall statistical performance. Is he going to be a valuable player for Alabama? I believe he probably will be. But to me, the Gibbs story here is about, once again, Alabama seemingly across the board, they're just getting smaller. You go from what Derrick Henry would have been, 6'4", 250, something along those lines, to now they got it's like 5'11", 200 pounds at the most. This is another example of Alabama putting a lot of its eggs into the basket of guys who are just smaller. And Jahmyr Gibbs is a good player. There's no question about that. He's a good player. And Alabama adding him is a big deal. But, once again, you're going to be left to wonder, can a smaller, thinner player like that really hold up against the grind of an SEC schedule and what Alabama hopes is a 15-game schedule? We've seen smaller, thinner, more frail players at Alabama not be able to withstand that for a full season a lot lately. And to me, Gibbs seems like the kind of player at Alabama who's just been getting hurt a lot. And I don't know. I mean, it's not without its risks. Cousin Eddie says at Laura S. Walker Golf Course, we have a picture of an alligator actually catching and eating a deer on the 9th hole. Careful going around in that 9th hole. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that, because if you're ever out and about and deer kind of run past you on a golf course, for instance, they themselves are pretty powerful animals. Once again, from a distance, you don't have an appreciation of their power, but when they go running past you, you really do get a sense of how powerful they are. To think that an alligator would eat a deer, that'd be a lot to see in real life. I told you about that video yesterday of the horse stomping on the alligator. Big animals fighting is just one of those things that, I don't know, man, it sort of gives you an appreciation for how small you are sometimes. And just the sheer brutality of nature in some respects. Let's see what else. G. Grace is in here. He says, you guys can get mad. I'm speaking facts. Things that happen. Bama will always break down the Kirby defense. Saban knows how. But, I hate to get into a tired argument, but, the Georgia defense was doing just fine against Alabama in the national championship game even before James Williams got hurt. Look, no one can deny it. Georgia had an awful game against Alabama in the SEC championship. But I would just be careful not taking too much comfort in that, given the fact that it was actually the Georgia defense that dominated the national championship game. And that happened, and I saw it with my own eyes. And, any questions about, Kirby as a coach or anything like that, I think all of that was eliminated because of that performance. By the way, the Michigan performance there as well, which I think gets underrated by Georgia fans at times, just how dominant Georgia was against Michigan. Then in the postseason last year, Kirby pushed the right buttons, I believe. Cindy OG asking about Zion Logue. Yes, I agree with you. I do believe he's going to be a much-needed force along the defensive line. And I think that Jordan Davis thinks that Zion Logue's a really good player. And that may be all I need to know right now, that that's an example of a guy that's probably going to be a lot less heralded than obviously the guy that played in front of him a year ago, but a really important addition to the Georgia team. When you face an opponent and you begin the game putting that team's rushing attack in handcuffs, it is just really hard to be the team playing against Georgia when that's the scenario. And a guy like Logue helps you do that. When you take their playbook and essentially cut it in half because all of a sudden their running plays should get left in the hopper for next week, that just makes it very hard to compete against Georgia, and Logue goes a long way towards being able to do that. Lesko says the best nickname on the team has to be Doogie Miller. I do like Doogie as a nickname. I like that as a nickname. Funny Union on the subject of Samuel Mpemba. Yeah, that's a big-time guy for sure. That's a big-time guy. Johnny on the subject of Stackhouse. Yeah, I like him too. Howard Eubanks also asking about returning interior defensive linemen. Logue, Stackhouse, you have to have Warren Brinson in that conversation. But I'm very high on Zion Logue. I am very high on him. Frank Patterson also enjoying the Booming Onion nickname. Was it Foster Moss who gave us the Booming Onion the other day? That was really funny. That was really good. Really good. Robert Barnes texting to say, Robert Barnes going back and forth with our buddy G. Grace. Let me go over to Facebook here for a moment. Here's what I'll say about Alabama really quick, is that Georgia's win against Alabama last year clearly didn't eliminate them from the national stage. Like, Alabama begins the year as the preseason number one team, begins the year as unquestionably the toughest team for Georgia or anybody to beat. There's no doubt that remains true. That Georgia didn't eliminate Alabama. But if you're an Alabama fan and you're not willing to give a lot more credit to Georgia after what it did a season ago, then I think you're kidding yourself. And I think that, the kinds of Alabama fans in our comment section, I think probably understand that for the most part. But, what happened a year ago, I don't think it eliminated Alabama from a category, but it certainly entered Georgia into a category. This idea that Alabama's got some sort of built-in advantage against Georgia or anything like that, if that was ever true before, it's just not true anymore. It's just not. That in a game, those two teams are likely to be in another fist fight, much the same way a lot of their battles have been. And, this idea that somehow the student Kirby Smart had a built-in disadvantage against his teacher, Nick Saban, I think we've kind of started to understand just how not true that is. Carter Lawson says Alabama fans do know the trend. They're just in denial. Some of them probably are. Scotty G also not happy with YouTube over here there as well. Lucy Bowers Boykin, others talking about a gator attack in Florida last year. I was in Florida a couple weeks ago and I read about one there. Got to be careful. Hugh Nash on the subject of Pup Howard saying, need to land him if no other reason. Connor can use the headline, dogs land their pup. I like that. Sometimes I do wish that we were a little bit more like the New York Post or something that had these big, tall, tabloid style headlines, plays on words, things like that. I'd kind of like that. Kent Holcomb, very good. Kent Holcomb, very good at tying the chips into all of our, or a good number of our sponsors there. Kent, that's well done. Good job. Very well done. Very well done. Scotty G says, pretty funny that the Gators are so bad. We're actually talking about the actual animal and not the football team itself, which is very funny. Sandy Price says, if Coach Monken can win a national title with Stetson, the Manning family has got to take notice. I mean, I think that's probably to a degree true. I think that if you're a big-time quarterback, whether your last name's Manning or not, seeing an offense that works is going to get your attention. And the Monken offense clearly works here. And, you know, Manning probably believes he's better than Stetson Bennett because every quarterback believes he's better than every other quarterback, period. And so I would imagine that is probably the kind of thing that would, get the Manning family's attention. Let's see what else. Jared Harmon says that was Saban's biggest fear. Kirby's got UGA in the cuff of being a monster. And like I've said this before, I think that nobody really wants college football to be easy. And when a guy comes along and makes it look a little too easy, there's a natural pushback against him. I think Kirby Smart's experiencing some of that right now. And, if you're Nick Saban or if you're an Alabama fan who's enjoyed the Nick Saban era, it's never comfortable to think that your perch has been, kind of moved in on, or someone's trying to, nudge you off that perch. And when the first, couple of games don't go well, and for Kirby Smart against Alabama, they clearly didn't. I think it's easy to kind of buy into, there's a narrative that's established here if Kirby can't get over the hump against Alabama. But in truth, all of that was always, I believe, unfair to Kirby when you think about, just how quickly he was trying to build UGA into a national championship type winner. Like some people try to make it sound like Kirby took too long to get here. Finally, it happened for Kirby. If you want to say finally it happened for Georgia because it had been 40 years, I think that's fine. But if you want to say finally it happened for Kirby, I think that's just a misunderstanding of the actual truth. In retrospect, it's actually amazing how quickly it happened for Kirby. 6 years into his coaching career, not how long it took. This is an amazing ascension to the top of college football, and you better believe that Nick Saban and everybody else has noticed that there as well. Joel Moody says, big animals fighting, kind of like wrestling, BA. Yes, I guess in some respects it is. I might pay for some pay-per-view of some of this kind of stuff if you could ever create that opportunity. Joel Moody says, could it be that Kirby outworks everybody else? Well, I do know this, Joel, and I think you would agree with me. Nobody outworks him. We know that for a fact. Sandy Price also saying, great to be a Gator hater. Sandy, I'd agree with you on that. Zebulon Owen, like in the Brock Powers nickname. We talked about that the other day. That's good stuff. Let's see what else. Howard Eubanks also checking in to say Bama's going to have no answer to the three giant amigos of tight ends the Dogs have. Nobody else will either, so he's feeling really good about that. And final look here at DawgNation.com for a moment. Keith Finney checking in to give you your Go Dogs over there as well. So we got to go for now, but we appreciate you being here for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down today. Y'all check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do that for you today. And if your water heater goes out, in any case, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. But you've got to find them online at rsandrews.com. Hope you all have a great day. I'll see you back here tomorrow morning, 9:45 for the 1st and 15, 10 a.m. after that, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Also, make sure you check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Today's actually a big day in the city of Atlanta, or across the state of Georgia there as well, because it's runoff election day. So you can get all of your election coverage there from the AJC, follow the elections that are taking place, or if you want to find out what you can vote on at your own polling place, AJC's got you covered on that too. So AJC.com for a lot more on that. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We will look forward to talking to you then.